Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I'm here to help you finish your Christmas shopping list and let everyone else over there stiff-arm their competition while trying to fight off that tryptophan on Turkey Night. Now, what we did was we partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get up to 75% off over 30,000 autographed sports collectibles during this holiday season. They have something for everyone. But how is RSA able to offer such great deals on JSA authentication, you ask? Well, they do this by making deals directly with athletes so there are no extra markups, and they choose to then pass that savings on to you, the customer. Now, all orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and a money-back guarantee. But hurry up because customers are so stark raving mad for RSA that memorabilia sells out daily. All you have to do is head over to shoprsa.com/SHN. Again, that's shoprsa.com/SHN. So don't wait to bring home your favorites and own a piece of sports history for you and the loved ones on your shopping list this holiday season. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Now, live and direct from the press box at Old Comiskey Park, it's time for When Football Was Football. Let's join your host, Joe Ziemba, with another forgotten tale from Chicago's pro football history. Let's go!
Thank you as always for that warm introduction, and welcome to another episode of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. Once again, our program will originate from the old dusty press box at Old Comiskey Park in Chicago, where 75 years ago this month, a monumental football game was played that is always remembered by the folks who follow the Cardinals. Back then, of course, the team was known as the Chicago Cardinals, the arch rivals of the Chicago Bears on the north side of the city. And that game on December 28th, 1947, was between the Cardinals and the Philadelphia Eagles for the NFL championship. The Cardinals won that game 28-21 on a frozen field right in front of us in Comiskey Park, and enabled the Cardinals to claim the 1947 NFL championship. Well, that was one to remember because the Cardinals still have not won another title in those 75 years. But that game, and I guess the lack of success since then, prompted me to put together a book that includes that 1947 game. So the purpose of our program tonight will be twofold. Love to give you a preview of the book called Bears vs. Cardinals, the NFL's oldest rivalry, as well as give you a hint or a preview of what's coming up here on the Sports History Network for When Football Was Football. Throughout the month of December, we're going to pick out a few of the key games and other events that took place on a specific day in December of 1947, prior to that wonderful game when the Cardinals were able to finally grab the NFL title back in '47. First of all, let's tackle the book, which was published recently by McFarland Press, and we're very grateful to those good folks for taking a chance on this publication. I actually started working on the book in 2010, set it aside for a while, did another book on high school football, and then returned to it. And one of the reasons for that was the release of great documents by the Dutch Sterneman family, which now reside at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. For those who don't know, Dutch Sterneman was the partner of George Halas for the first 10 years or so of the National Football League. And Dutch, he maintained all the financial records from the Bears in those early days, as well as personal correspondence and other documents. And it really helped me to get started on working on the book, since you always look for something that hasn't been published before, something new in the world of football history. And the Sterneman collection certainly gave me that opportunity, and the wonderful documents that are included in that. So with the previous research I had done for my earliest book on the Cardinals called When Football Was Football, the Chicago Cardinals and the Birth of the NFL, I decided to go ahead and start writing about the Bears and the Cardinals and their longest rivalry. One of the things that drives me nuts is when the Bears and the Packers play, and it is a long rivalry, but it's not the oldest. That's the Bears and the Cardinals, which kicked off first in 1920. The Packers didn't join the league until 1921. And that gave me another idea of maybe to take the opportunity to correct some history, both for the Bears and the Cardinals. Usually we rely as historians and researchers on documents from the time. For example, George Halas wrote his autobiography and released it about 50 years after a lot of the events occurred. And then for the Cardinals, we didn't have a whole lot of information because, like the Bears, the Cardinals' records, many of them were lost in fires sometime in the last few decades. So you almost have to start from scratch when researching the history of these two teams. So I wanted to give some recognition also to Chris O'Brien, who basically was the founder of the Cardinals. He's really a forgotten man in the National Football League, even though he was one of the founders back when the owners got together back in 1920 to start what is now known as the National Football League. I also wanted to plug in some holes on the background of George Halas. So as we start the book, we get background on both Chris O'Brien and George Halas. I wanted to dig deeper into Halas, what he did before he became a member of the Bears, so to speak. And there again wasn't much on his high school career at Crane Tech High School in Chicago, nor on his University of Illinois athletic career, where he was an outstanding athlete. And we found out that Halas really didn't play much football for the simple reason that he wasn't very big. But he did play a lot of indoor baseball, which looks a lot like 16-inch softball that's played in Chicago today. You have a rather large ball, the bats used were broomsticks, and it's played indoors. And this is well before basketball took over in this country as the primary winter sport. So you could play a game of indoor baseball in a large room within a school or an auditorium. Similar rules to baseball, except much shorter bases. And even though the ball is big and bulky, the pitcher could still throw as fast as he wanted to. So it was not... Sometimes you had a great pitcher, which Halas was, or his brother, you might have very low scores. Halas really didn't play football until his senior year when he was a lineman on the lightweight football team, meaning they were probably under 150 pounds back then. So he took off a year from school after high school before he entered the University of Illinois. And there, as I mentioned, he became an outstanding athlete. You won't see anyone at a major college who can start and star in 3 major sports, which Halas did in football, basketball, and baseball. His football career was restrained a bit by a broken jaw one year, a broken leg in another year, and of course freshmen were not eligible. So it wasn't until his senior year when he really started playing well and getting the action that he wanted at the University of Illinois. And then in January of 1918, Halas decided to join the Navy. He was stationed up at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, which actively recruited athletes in baseball and basketball and football and track to represent the base during World War I. And Halas was part of a great team from the Great Lakes Training Center, which actually won the January 1st, 1919 Rose Bowl. And Halas, finally finding some stardom, was the most valuable player in that game. He was playing along with Patty Driscoll, who was once at Northwestern, and Jimmy Councilman, who would one day be the head coach of the Chicago Cardinals. So it was a nice get-together for those athletes. They had great success playing major colleges. Of course, in 1918 season, that is, there was a flu going on. A lot of colleges didn't even have teams. There was a restriction of the crowd, so they didn't have any large amounts of people gathering with the flu. And also World War I was going on as well. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Chris O'Brien was still with the team that he helped start with his brother and one of his friends back in 1899 as the Morgan Athletic Association. The team kept together, most of the players, Lacey O'Brien, through the early years of the century, and Chris O'Brien never did stop playing. In about 1917 or 1918, the team incorporated, according to the records in the state of Illinois, as the Racing Cardinals Social and Athletic Club. And there's one of those names you just can't make up, a social club for a football team. Ellis got out of the service. He told his mother he was done with football. He got a job for $45 a week at an engineering firm in Chicago, and until he got a call from a kind of a new professional team or semi-professional team in Hammond, Indiana that would pay him $100 a game to play for Hammond, which he did. So it was after that season, Hallis decided that maybe he was done with football until he got a phone call early in 1920 from the representatives of the A.E. Staley Company in Decatur, Illinois, to come down and coach the football team, recruit the team, see if he could make it stronger, as well as use his engineering skills working for the Staley Company. And of course, Hallis jumped on that, went back on his promise to his mother, and went on one of the very first recruiting trips for the National Football League, bringing in numerous All-Americans who would have a job working in the plant. Hallis was able to also get the owner to allow the team to practice football 2 hours a day, so they were getting paid literally for being at work in the Staley factory. The Cardinals on the south side of Chicago were also growing a little bit, and Chris O'Brien was adding players, and the most notable was Patty Driscoll, who we mentioned a moment ago. Patty in 1920 was the highest paid player in the league at $300 a game, I believe, when most of the players were still getting $25, maybe $10, or whatever they could get from passing the hat at the end of a game. But as we mentioned, Chris O'Brien and George Hallis were part of the original founding fathers of the NFL in 1920, and that year the NFL's oldest rivalry started. And the Cardinals and the Staleys, the Decatur Staleys, met in 1920. A year later, the Staleys were in Chicago, known as the Chicago Staleys, and part of the information we uncovered for the book was I'm not certain Hallis left Decatur voluntarily. Some new information came to light that showed that perhaps he was already thinking of leaving, and the Staleys certainly might not have wanted to endure any more expenses for a football team traveling around the country. So Hallis left Decatur in 1921 and started quite a feud with the Cardinals by signing Patty Driscoll, who was under contract with the Cardinals, not only to a playing contract, but also as the part owner of the Bears. And these documents are found in the Illinois State Records. So we have a copy of that contract we were able to work from in the book. And the league did not like that, and Hallis got his hand slapped and was told to stay away from recruiting people under contract to other teams, which was one of the reasons the league started, was to get rid of the jumping of rosters from team to team, as well as for one team to maybe raid another team's roster to get a good player. We also talk about the recruitment of Red Grange in 1925 and some of the fun stories that happened with the Bears being on tour. And also I wanted to dig up, there was, you may have heard, in 1925, a bit of a controversy when the Cardinals played a couple of games in order to accumulate more wins over Pottsville in the standings. They had a couple of games that might have looked a little odd. In fact, in one of them, they played some high school players from Englewood High School in Chicago. So one of my goals there was to find out what happened to those players in years gone by, and one of them actually became a superstar in another sport. And after that, 1925, we move on through the Depression. Bronco Nagurski joins the league. We talk about the Sterneman papers, which reveal the salaries paid by the Bears in those days, how much they paid someone to scout for them, how much they were making off of, for example, the Red Grange tour, which is really fascinating information. So after that, we move into when the Monsters of the Midway took over the NFL in the early 40s. The war came, stories about the card pits in 1944 when teams merged. So the Cardinals and the Steelers merged, and might have been the worst team of all time. They were called the Card Pits, and eventually that was changed to the Carpets by some of the media. And why not? Everyone walked all over them during their 0-10 season. But later in the decade, in 1947 and 48, through some shrewd drafts, returning war veterans, the Cardinals had the top team in the league, as we mentioned. In 1947, won the title. Then in 1948, they were probably even a little better with an 11-1 mark, although they returned to face the Eagles. This time the Eagles won during a snowstorm, 7-0. And through the 50s, neither team really had a lot of success on the field. There was a constant bombardment of invectives and wild talk between the owners of the two teams throughout the 50s. And finally, the Cardinals moved to St. Louis in March of 60. And that came after the team attempted to move into Dike Stadium at Northwestern University, and George Halas pulled out an old agreement that said that it was called the Madison Street Agreement. That's an east-west street that runs through downtown Chicago, and said the Cardinals would not play north of Madison Street and the Bears would not play south of it. So, after that, I decided to go back, and maybe today and for the next month, we're going to talk about that Cardinals' last championship. For example, on December 7th, 1947, the Cardinals bounced back from a sluggish losing streak, a mini one that everyone thought would put them out of contention, to bounce the Eagles 45-21 in front of over 34,000. And so in the next few weeks, in the month of December, we're going to go back and highlight some of these wonderful stories from that great month when the Cardinals won that last championship. We're going to honor the 75th anniversary of the Cardinals winning the NFL title, and we thank you, the listeners, for staying with us as we present some extra episodes of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.